We've got a lot to cover. I didn't necessarily think we'd have that much just a few weeks in, but we had 4 upsets last night. So let's dive right into those. What'd you think, Kendall?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing with college baseball this year is you look at the Tennessee game last night with Boston College, and the long ball has been prominent yet again. I mean, if you look at Joe Petrano for BC last night, he gets a 477-foot home run against the Vols. Santa Clara knocked off Stanford. UT Arlington and first-year head coach Clay Van Hook, they knock off TCU. So I think the biggest thing for me when I look at college baseball is, midweek games are totally unpredictable. Everybody has a couple arms. Everybody has a couple of big bats. And so, midweek games are important for those teams. And when you look at teams like Boston College, they're off to a 9-1 start. They've been really surprising. So give Mike Gambino and those guys a lot of credit. Then you have Coastal Carolina knocking off, Wake Forest, who was previously undefeated. Brock Wilken had 2 homers for Wake. And I actually did like the way Wake kind of responded when Coastal got up on them in the later innings. But Derek Bender and the Chanticleers would not be stopped. I think Bender had 2 home runs last night for the Chants. So you give Coastal a lot of credit. Dropped to another
And
really good
Stanford,
start with Gary Gilmore.
that upset kind of drew my attention because the beginning of the season, you talked about that
Yeah.
lineup being just crazy bats, and then pitching kind of was the answer in that upset.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, Rusty Filter, if you look at Santa Clara historically, like they've played teams really tough in non-conferences. So that wasn't too surprising to me. And I think Stanford's one of those clubs, a lot like, Tennessee lost a series or, went 1-2 in a weekend at Arizona a couple weeks ago. I think, we look at Stanford, they're a team that has been good, but not great so far. But that really is kind of the theme of everybody for me in the top 10, other than like Wake Forest and maybe Florida, is I think some of those teams have just been good, but not great. But it's early, and we've got a lot
Absolutely.
of
So let's
baseball to
talk the
play.
top 4 teams. They've kind of been the top 4 teams for the past few weeks. Obviously, that will take up a little bit
Yeah.
this week, but we've got LSU, Stanford, which we're talking about, Tennessee and Ole Miss. Can you kind of just go through what you've been seeing from them and how they've been living up to expectations?
Yeah, I think I'm the most impressed with Ole Miss. I mean, I think when you look at the Reds overall, I mean, this is a team coming off a national championship, and not to bag on Mississippi State or anything, but if you look at the same state, they were a club that a couple of years ago won the national championship, and the next year they missed the NCAA tournament. I think when you look at Ole Miss, it's easy to kind of get in cruise control when you win a national championship. I think when you look at the Reds overall, they've been really good. I mean, especially when you consider they lost Josh Mallett, their closer. Hunter Elliott's, on the shelf, their Friday guy. Their superstar in Omaha last year. He's on the shelf. He may be out for the year, but they're going to try to get him back in a few weeks. So given the fact they haven't had those 2 guys, and they're still winning games, and they're still, being consistent overall, that really says a lot about their offense. I think if you look at, the Reds overall offensively, Ethan Groff is a guy I loved at Tulane last year. He transfers there. Anthony Calarco was a well-accomplished, hitter, this previous stop with a lot of at-bats. He's been an instant impact guy. So I think when you look at that lineup top to bottom, it's lethal. Tennessee, they're a club that, the first couple of weeks didn't have Maui Ahuna at shortstop. I think it's going to take them some time to kind of get to the level they want to get at. But, I still, believe in the Vols. I mean, I think they have a elite starting rotation. I like their pieces at the back end of the bullpen. And there's no doubt in my mind that those guys are going to hit with Blake Bird, Jared Dickey, and company.
All
They're
right,
going
so
to
let's
hit big
talk about
time.
Louisville really quick. You wrote about them after the Shriners College Classic. They had a
Ooh.
great weekend, took a big jump in the rankings. What are you seeing from that club?
Boy, I loved what I saw from Louisville over the weekend. This was a team that coming this season, if you look back at the Super last year, kind of their Achilles heel coming in the year was expected to be the starting rotation. They didn't, last year they had a Jared Poland at the front of the rotation. This year, going into the season, they didn't have like that dude. And so far, I mean, they've really stepped up on the mound. I think, Ryan Hawks was really good against A&M, was up to 94, 95 with his fastball, with a nasty breaking ball. Gordon College transfer threw really well on Saturday for them. And then Carson Liggett, threw really well for them as well to wrap it up on Sunday. So I like what they're doing in the starting rotation. I like their depth in the mound. And then, boy, I tell you what, when you look at their offensive lineup with Christian Knapczyk at the top of that lineup, Absolutely love that guy. He might be my favorite player in college baseball, just the way he plays the game, the defensive skill set, the offensive skill set. Jack Payton is certainly a well-accomplished hitter who's off to a great start. And I think if you look at the lineup as a whole, I mean, when you have guys like Logan Beard near the bottom of the lineup, that gives you an idea of just how deep this team is. I loved what I saw from Louisville, and before they played A&M on Friday, the Astros might have gave them a little extra ammo. They played a highlight video of A&M's super regional clinching win over Louisville with all of Louisville's players standing on the edge of the dugout. They proceeded to pummel A&M after that game. So I love the
All
mindset
right,
of this
so we
club,
just
man.
talked
They're
some
looking
top
good.
teams. Who do you have the most confidence in right now? I know it's so early, but just in the beginning few weeks, who are you feeling confident about?
Well, I think of those top five teams, I feel really confident about LSU. I mean, I think LSU as a whole, I mean, you got to love what Paul Skeens is doing on the front of the rotation. Offensively, they're outstanding. And the other thing about LSU, too, is we talk so much about Dylan Cruz and Tommy White and Trey Morgan for obvious reasons. They're fantastic players. But how about Gavin Dugas at in the middle of that lineup? You got Jordan Thompson at shortstop, who's really stepped up from an offensive standpoint. So that isn't just a lineup that you look at the top five and you're like, oh man, they're unstoppable. That's a lineup that top to bottom is really, really good. So I feel pretty good about them. And I'm also kind of curious some of these red hot teams, how they fare going into conference play. We talked about Wake Forest. They go to Duke this weekend. That's going to be really interesting how they respond from that Coastal Carolina game. I think you look at Alabama as a club for me. South Carolina really in the same vein, although they did play Clemson this past weekend. But two clubs that hadn't played the best schedules, but were off to red hot starts. How will they do in SEC play in a couple of weeks? So those are three red hot teams, and I'm fascinated to see what they
All
do
right, so
once they get in the
let's
league
talk
play.
some top players. Anybody that you kind of weren't expecting to go off that's going off, hitting above 500 to start the season?
Yeah, how about my man Chris Canizero at Virginia Tech? I mean, the Bucknell transfer. He certainly was a talented hitter at Bucknell last year, but I mean, the guy's hitting 540, coming off a Player of the Week honors, just a fantastic week against a good Charlotte team, by the way. It's not like they were playing, some bad team. They were playing Charlotte, who's could be a regional team at the end of the year. So Chris Canizero be in that mix. Nick Klemp was a guy that watching one of the Portland A&M games for a little bit. And that guy was just a hitting machine. I think he's hitting like 500. I think his OBP for the year right now is like 594. So, keep an eye on Nick Klemp out on the West Coast. He's done a really good job at Portland. And I also kind of pinpoint a couple of freshmen. Charlie Condon at Georgia, for the Dogs. I mean, he's hitting 538. I'm not sure anybody saw that coming. The Dogs off to kind of a surprisingly hot start. Then Ike Irish, one of my favorite names in college baseball. You got to love a name Ike Irish. But, he's hitting 585, I think, or around the 580 range for Auburn right now, who is also off to a great start. So it's interesting to see those two freshmen, hitting well over 500. That's pretty impressive at this day and age. And, I think you also look at Jack Kaggs at Florida. I mean, how about his start? I mean, you're talking about a guy who is up to 98, 99 on the mound as a weekend starter. At least going in the weekend around, was leading the nation in homers. And by the way, he's doing the inverted U when he's not running to lead the Gators to victory. So I love everything about the guy.
Okay, how about some top pitchers? You just mentioned a few, but I want to talk about some arms on the mound. Thinking back to my top pitchers piece ahead of the season, we talked about Paul Skeens, obviously Rhett Lauder. I mean, those 0.5 ERA or under. Who else is impressing you?
Yeah, I think, going into the year when you look at Iowa, they're a club that entered our top 25 this past week. And, I really like what they have on the mound. Marcus Morgan, Ty Langenberg. Langenberg wasn't great the day I saw him, but, Brody Breck, remember that name. You're talking about a guy who's in triple digits with his fastball, pitched against LSU in Round Rock a couple weeks ago. And, he's off to a really solid start, 22 strikeouts in 12 in the third innings. 2.1. I think guys like Chase Dolander are kind of doing what we kind of expected. I think we've if you look out on the West Coast, there's some guys out there as well that have gotten off to really nice starts. I like what UCLA is doing on the mound thus far this season. So I mean, there are a lot of pitchers out there. Paul Skeens. I mean, the thing I like about Paul Skeens, and I know it's like it's like easy to go, oh, Paul Skeens is really impressive. But I think when you look at Paul Skeens and you look at a guy that's coming into the season, he's going to a place where the spotlight is on him, and everybody expects him to be, incredible. That can be hard to deal with expectation wise. And Paul Skeens has been as advertised. He has been phenomenal. He's been consistent with his fastball. The fastball velocity has been, A plus. The breaking ball has continued to improve. And by the way, when you could throw a change up at like 93 miles per hour, that helps you too. So I really like what I've seen from him because it's easy to throw like that and let expectations get to you a little bit. But he is one of those guys. He does not care. Like he's there to do his job.
Okay, how about some teams that have maybe surprised you for better or for worse? You mentioned Georgia off to a good. Anybody else? Better,
Yeah.
worse, both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, how about, we talked about BC earlier, with the Tennessee win, but how about the job that Mike Gambino's done? This is a club that could be following the same model as Virginia Tech last year. Picked near the bottom of the league. Virginia Tech was. All of a sudden, they hosted a super regional at the end of the year. I'm not saying BC's going to do that, but I mean, they're off to a 9-1 start. They've played a solid schedule. They swept Kennesaw State. They've beaten Rutgers. They haven't played a weak schedule, and they're 9-1. They just beat Tennessee. I think Troy, the job that Skylar Mead's done there, they're 11-1. They lost to, Florida Gulf Coast last night. But, Troy's off to a really good start. And how about Florida Gulf Coast? Dave Tollett has done a tremendous job down in Fort Myers. And those guys, they take a series from Florida State over the weekend. They're playing really well. And then I would say Iowa and Louisville to an extent. I mean, I thought Iowa was going to be good. They're a team projected to be in a regional at the end of the year. But, beating LSU the way they did in Round Rock was really impressive. I think they're going to have a great year. I think they're the one Big Ten team with an elite week in rotation. And I think Louisville, just how good they looked. It's not necessarily that they're good, but just how good they looked over the weekend. Their starting rotation was fantastic. And, again, their offensive lineup was relentless. And the thing I like about them is Dan McDonald's like the master of motivation. And he has those guys feeling like, man, we fell short last year. People didn't respect us coming the year, namely us, because we had them ranked a little bit lower than everybody else. And they are a team on a mission right now. Keep an eye on them. They're pretty scary.
Kendall, getting a lot of comments about Texas A&M and Arkansas. Can you share your thoughts on those two clubs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was a big weekend for A&M. I mean, they lose that 16-inning game at Texas Tech. All of a sudden, the complexion of their non-conference play changes quite a bit because, they lost a series to Portland. You would have bounced back by losing a series, or going 1-2 in Houston. So that's big for them. Also big for them, Austin Boast kind of got back on track offensively, a preseason All-American. So I kind of think A&M's going to follow the same models they did last year. I might be totally wrong, whereas they kind of struggle in non-conference to kind of put all the pieces together. Arkansas, for me, I still really like Arkansas, but boy, they are like one injury away from being in like really bad shape on the mound. You're talking about Jackson Wiggins is out for the year. Brady Tygert's out, on the shelf for 6 to 7 weeks with a UCL strain, excuse me. And then you look at Cody Frank, a key arm for them out of the bullpen. He's now out for the year with a lat injury. So they cannot afford another injury going into conference play, the Hogs, that is.
Okay, how about some updated storylines now that we're a few weeks in? I know we've got conference play coming up pretty soon. What are the biggest question marks right now for you?
Well, I think that one of the biggest storylines for me is the long ball. I mean, I'm actually looking at the stat now. One of our 643 charts just sent this over. But at this point last year, we were at 2,689 home runs through 20 days of the season. This year, we're at 3,462. That is a lot more long balls. And I think balls are being hit or going even further because, I mean, you look at Joe Vitrano's home run last night for BC. I mean, I think I've seen 470 like 3 or 4 times on TrackMan data so far this year. So the long ball, you're at 1.69 home runs per game through 20 days last year, 2.15 through 20 games this year. So that's a big storyline for me. I think the other big storyline for me is the pitch clock. Don't get mad, people, but I'm actually kind of digging it. I mean, I've been to several games that are like 2 hours and 30 minutes long. I'm not complaining. The other thing I'd like to see is after being at the 16-inning A&M and Texas Tech game, I wouldn't mind seeing the extra inning rule in play a little bit more. So those are two big storylines for me. I think the other one for me will be, we didn't talk about it, but some of these teams that we thought would be pretty good this year that are off to slow starts. Tulane, 2-11. I thought they would actually finish near the top of the American. I'm kind of curious to see if they can get things going. They played a really tough schedule. Then you look at Texas and Houston, both with losing records right now. I thought both of those teams would be in the contention for regional spots. They've kind of have to get on their horse as well. So those are kind of some storylines for me.
I like them. The long ball. Why do you think that is, Kendall? I'm curious.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the last 2 years, the long ball has been totally different than it was before. So, I mean, I don't know if it's launch angle. I don't know. It's hard to say if the ball's juice. But, my theory on this, and not to ruffle feathers, but my theory on this is if you remember back, 3 or 4 years ago, Major League Baseball got rid of a lot of, I think it was like 15 or 20,000 balls because there was some sort of issue with it. They thought they were hot. Like, I've almost kind of wondered if, those are just being retrofitted for college baseball because it really has been much different. I remember last year watching Ivan Melendez for Texas, the Golden Spikes winner, hit some balls that, they were still going up when they went over the wall. And so I'm one of those people, I don't want to dig into it too much because I actually love it. I actually love the long ball. I think it creates a lot of excitement in the sport. And so I like seeing it.
Agreed. I love it too. All right. Lastly, let's get some big matchups you're excited for. Anything coming up?
Yeah, I think when you look at the ACC, starting off this weekend, we talked about Wake Forest being at Duke, and you could argue that Duke's a little bit of a surprise. They've won 9 games already. I think when you look at those guys overall, they scored 50, 54 to 57 runs against Baylor, a couple weekends ago. So I think that series is really interesting. I think NC State, speaking of red hot teams, NC State's been fantastic. They go on the road to face a Miami club coming off the series loss to Florida. I'll be very curious to see, how, Peyton Green and Carter Trice and those guys do down at Miami. And also Virginia. Virginia has been terrific so far this season. Kyle Till hitting well over 500. He's been one of the top hitters in college baseball. They haven't played the best schedule, so they go to North Carolina this weekend, and that's going to be a very stiff test for the Cavs. I'll just be very curious to see how they look because we don't have they don't have a litmus test against a good team so far this year. The Tar Heels are a good team, and we'll see how they kind of handle that.
And you did mention a few, but I just want to leave everybody with this: 8 teams outside of the top 25 that we should really keep our eye on.
How about Benny Orloff and UC Irvine? I love what they've done so far this year. They're sitting at 10-2 overall. The Anteaters have played a solid schedule. They swept Arizona State, they swept Tulane, and so they've played some pretty decent teams. And I think Tulane's way better than that 2-11 record, by the way. So I like what the Anteaters are doing. And I think really this kind of dovetails nicely into another storyline in college baseball right now, and that's the rise of the Big West. I'm not saying the Big West is great this year, but at this time last year, the Big West was like 25 games under 500 in non-conference play. I think right now they're 15 or 20 over 500. And so I think college baseball is better when the Big West is good because I have a lot of respect for those programs. They might not have the 9-figure budgets, but they invest a lot in the college baseball, and that league's gotten off to a really nice start. Long Beach State took care of business over the weekend as well. So keep an eye on the Big West. They're off to a really good start.
All right, Kendall. Well, thanks so much for joining me, breaking this all down. Everybody, thanks for following along, and we'll have more of these in the future. But Kendall, thanks.